questions. We're going to turn now to First Minister's questions. Question number 1 from Jackson Carlow.
Presiding Officer, I would like to ask today about Scottish Conservative plans to introduce whole-life custody. In February 2017, Nicola Sturgeon said she was open-minded about proposals to guarantee that the most appalling criminals are never released from prison. Is that still her position?
First Minister.
Always been open-minded to anything that improves our justice system and ensures that victims get the justice they require and deserve. In terms of whole-life sentences, as I've said previously in this chamber, there is of course nothing to prevent a court at the moment imposing a sentence that would cover the natural life of a prisoner. I think it is best that sentencing is a matter for courts, not a matter for politicians. I don't believe that the problem in our justice system is that while I absolutely am of the view that serious offenders should be sent to prison for long periods of time, I think the general challenge in our justice system is not that we are sending too few people to prison. It's how we make sentencing more effective so that we continue to reduce re-offending and continue to see a downward trend in crime overall.
Jackson Carlow.
Well, let me be very clear. Judges do not already have this power. Otherwise, charities like the Howard League wouldn't be calling it radical. Now, of course, from that answer, we know that Nicola Sturgeon's position has changed since 2017, because she ordered her MSPs to vote against our proposal for whole-life custody in June this year. My colleague Liam Kerr brought forward a proposed change in the law so life can indeed mean life for the worst offenders. Today, he has published some of the responses to his consultation received from ordinary members of the public. They include a former police officer who says this: "It is an affront to see serious offenders released to re-offend, particularly in cases where the offender has stated their intention to re-offend upon release. For the good of society and to keep the law-abiding majority safe, the worst must never be released." He's right. So doesn't the First Minister regret voting against whole-life custody?
First Minister.
It is open to a court that considers it necessary and considers it appropriate to impose a sentence on somebody that would span their natural life. I think the example that is sometimes used of a case where that happened was the World's End murder, where Angus Sinclair had a sentence imposed that would have taken him beyond his natural life. I don't want to misquote the Sentencing Council, but I do recollect that the point has been made there that that is a power that courts already have. Of course, the Parole Board also has a role to play in deciding when it is safe or when it is not safe and in the public interest for prisoners to be released from prison. I think those arrangements are right. I think it is right that sentencing is a matter for the courts. It of course is right and proper that politicians put the right legislative framework in place for that, and I believe that is what has happened. It is absolutely correct that the most serious offenders go to prison for lengthy periods of time. But what the correct periods of time should be in individual cases is rightly and properly a matter for the independent court system.
Jackson Carlow.
The problem is that many people are released who shouldn't be. It's all very well to talk academically about risk management, but what the Scottish public need is a guarantee. If the crime is serious enough, no parole and no release. That's what our proposal delivers. One response to the consultation, which must remain anonymous, is very difficult to read. Indeed, it's difficult for me to articulate, but I think the Chamber needs to hear it. I was raped. Rapists, paedophiles and murderers destroy lives. So long as families of people murdered or people who have been sexually assaulted know the person who ripped apart their life can be allowed to roam free, how do you think we can ever rest easily? For the sake of victims like this, I urge the First Minister, will she change her mind again, support whole-life custody and give these victims the justice they deserve?
First Minister.
Well, I fully understand the views and the opinions expressed by people who have been victims of crime, and I would not stand here and presume to disagree with those opinions that come from deep personal experience. But it is incumbent on me to be very clear. I think it's incumbent on all of us to be very clear about the law as it stands and not to inadvertently mislead about what the law currently is. The law right now is clear. A punishment part for a life sentence can extend beyond the rest of a person's life. So it is possible for a court to impose a sentence that extends beyond a person's life. It's also important to understand that when the punishment part of a sentence expires, it does not mean that a prisoner is automatically released. That then becomes a matter for the independent parole board to determine, and they have to assess as part of that determination the risk to the public. That is the law, and these are the arrangements as they stand at the moment. I absolutely understand why people who have experienced the most serious and heinous crimes will always think that we should look to change the law, and we should never ever close our minds to that. But it is important to be clear about what the law says right now, and I hope that now that I have done so, Jackson Carlaw will also reflect on what he is saying.
Jackson Carlaw.
Presiding officer, it's absolutely correct. We must not inadvertently mislead, and therefore it's important not to assert, because it is not true, that it is possible to impose a whole life sentence. It is not. Presiding officer, this week most of us were shocked to learn that violent crime in Scotland has risen by 10% in just 1 year and is now at its highest level for 7 years. I'm not sure the communities across Scotland blighted by violent crime will be satisfied by what the First Minister has said. Presiding officer, Linda MacDonald was attacked in Dundee by a convicted murderer who was released on home leave. She has this to say: whole life sentences give justice for victims and families who have suffered at the hands of these violent, sick, dangerous criminals. It gives reassurance that the public are safe, gives us confidence that life means the whole of their life. If dangerous killers are not given a second chance and released, they cannot get the opportunity to kill again. Presiding officer, police officers, prison officers and victims have all backed our proposal, but not Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP. It's a simple choice. Whose rights do you ultimately put first? The rights of the victims of crime or those of the criminal? We choose to put the victims first. Isn't it time the First Minister and her government, through the force of their actions, did the same?
First Minister.
I understand why those affected in individual cases make the case for changes to the law, and I will never criticise any individual who does so, and indeed I, the Justice Secretary, always stand ready to meet with anybody who has been a victim of crime so that we have the deepest possible understanding of the experiences they've been through. I recall, and I'm not going to read it out because I don't want this to turn into this kind of exchange, but Jackson Carlaw a couple of years ago, in 2015 actually, warned politicians against using individual cases in order to make these broader points, and I would have agreed with them then, and I would ask him to reflect carefully on how he makes these cases. The situation right now is, as I have set out, a punishment part for a life sentence can extend beyond the rest of a person's life. We have seen the punishment part of life sentences over the past 10 years increase from 12 to 13 years to now 18 to 19 years, and whether at the end of a punishment part a prisoner is released from prison is down to the decision of the independent parole board. And risk to public safety, of course, is the key consideration, or one of the key considerations that is taken into account in these decisions. And I think it is important that all of us understand that. Jackson Carlaw said that experts backed Liam Kerr's bill. I'm sure some do. I don't challenge that at all, but many don't. I mean, I can look at the... I thought I heard Jackson Carlaw say that experts backed his bill. But the Scottish Legal Action Group, for example, have said about the bill that they think it is unnecessary, unethical and regressive, and they oppose it in the strongest possible terms. So we have to do the right things for victims. That's why we're taking forward a range of changes to make sure that victims' voices are heard much more loudly in the whole process. But it is also incumbent on us to be clear with victims of crime and with the general public what the situation is at the present. And I fear that Jackson Carlaw is not doing that in some of the comments he's made today.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, who is the more expert in setting a clear, transparent and neutral referendum question, the Electoral Commission or Mike Russell?
First Minister.
Well, The Electoral Commission, I would say, because the Electoral Commission did do it for the question that would be proposed for a future independence referendum. I don't know anybody across Scotland, with the exception of politicians who seem to be running scared of the verdict of the Scottish people when that question is asked again. I don't know anybody who thinks that that question is anything other than clear and understandable. But I'm going to take today's question from Richard Leonard as progress, because in asking me about the question for an independence referendum, he now appears to be accepting that an independence referendum is inevitable. So that's progress.
Richard Leonard.
It's not just politicians who are saying this. Clear, transparent and neutral is not my expression. It is the considered view of Dame Sue Bruce, the Electoral Commissioner for Scotland. She told the Finance and Constitution Committee of this Parliament, and I quote, "We strongly believe that the Electoral Commission should be asked to test the question." She argued this on the grounds of, and I quote, "the integrity of the process," to establish that the question is clear, transparent and neutral in its setting. First Minister, why are you prepared to disregard those principles?
First Minister.
The question was tested by the Electoral Commission, and more than that, the question was tested in the reality of a referendum. And I don't know anybody in Scotland, with the exception of the Tories and their friends in the Labour Party, who say anything other than that question was clear, understandable, comprehensible and completely transparent. It seems to me that Labour and the Tories have now realised that they're not going to be able to block the right of the Scottish people to choose their own future, so they're now wondering how they can rig the whole process. Well, I've got news for Richard Leonard. The people of Scotland will get the chance to choose a better future than Tory Brexit Britain. But again, lastly, I say to Richard Leonard, if he now accepts that it is right to allow the people of Scotland to choose their own future in an independence referendum, then I welcome that. And then let's have the discussions about the detail, and then let's get on to the substance of that argument.
Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, the people of Scotland chose their future 5 years ago. The electoral... Well, let me try again. Let me try again with what the Electoral Commission has said. Because the Electoral Commission is clear that the question needs to be tested. And they say, and I quote them, regardless of whether the Commission has previously published views on the question proposed. So you are ignoring the Electoral Commission, but you are also ignoring the Law Society of Scotland. In its evidence to Parliament, the Law Society argues that your approach, and I quote, precludes the Commission from scrutinising the question. And they say that means that the referendum question would avoid, and I quote them, the level of scrutiny and accountability which should be applied to important questions which may affect the whole of Scotland. So this is not just about the integrity of this process, this is about the integrity of your government. The Electoral Commission and the Law Society both say that this is the wrong approach, so why don't you listen to them? What have you got to hide? Or are you simply trying to rig the process?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I have to be honest here. I am really struggling to keep up with Richard Leonard's twists and turns here. If I'm understanding him right, and bear with me here because I know this is a bit complicated, Richard Leonard is standing up here today demanding that we test a question again for a referendum that he also says shouldn't happen and he's not going to allow to happen. That's the first inconsistency and contradiction in Richard Leonard's position. Then he says the people of Scotland shouldn't have the right to have a referendum at all because we chose our future 5 years ago. The people of the UK voted on Brexit 3 years ago, but Richard Leonard supports a second Brexit referendum for the whole of the UK. And he seems to have missed all that has changed in the 5 years since the independence referendum. When people like him were telling the people of Scotland that the only way to protect their membership of the European Union was to vote against independence. We now know those promises weren't worth the paper they were written on. It's time for Scotland to have the opportunity to choose our future. It is time for Scotland to choose independence.
Thank you. We've got a few additional constituency supplementaries. Before I move on, just could I encourage all members not to use the term you in the chamber. Address the First Minister by her title or her name, but not use the term you. That applies to the chair. First question from Liz Smith, to be followed by Lee MacArthur.
Thank you. The First Minister will know that earlier this week, a group of GPs in Perth City wrote to NHS Tayside officials to intimate their deep concern about the implications for their medical practice following the sudden closure of the GP practice in Bridgefern. I have this letter here, and they state that it is unacceptable that patient safety has been compromised. Does the First Minister agree with them?
First Minister.
The Health Secretary is aware of this letter, has met, I understand, with the Chief Executive of the Board and with the Integrated Joint Board. I'm more than happy to ask the Health Secretary to correspond with Liz Smith about the detail of that letter and the actions that will be taken to ensure that those concerns are properly addressed. She's absolutely right to point out that patient safety must always be the priority in any decision that is taken at any level of the National Health Service.
Lee MacArthur, to be followed by Angela Constance.
Thank you. Back in April, I raised with the First Minister concerns over the disruption to Lifeline flights serving Orkney and communities across the Highlands and Islands as a result of industrial action by air traffic controllers. 5 months on, that dispute remains unresolved, and this week has seen more passengers on flights to Orkney and Shetland left stranded, including many IELTS patients returning from hospital appointments in Aberdeen. Does she understand the anger and frustration felt by those left paying the price for a failure by HIAL and the unions to resolve this dispute? And will she ask the Transport Secretary to step in and help find a resolution to this long-running and damaging dispute?
First Minister.
Yes, I do understand people's frustrations when there is any disruption caused by an industrial dispute like this. When I was in Shetland over the summer, I spoke to a number of people there who were concerned that the dispute hadn't been resolved. I know there were then efforts to resolve it. My message both to HIAL and to the unions would be to make sure they do get round the table and find a way of resolving that. The Transport Secretary, the Government, will obviously do everything we can to help bring about a resolution, but ultimately is for the employer and the trade unions to find that resolution, and I hope that that happens quickly.
Angela Constance, to be followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I know the First Minister is well aware of the heartache faced by the family of Kirsty Maxwell following Kirsty's death in Benidorm 2 years ago. The family this week received yet another blow, with newspapers reporting that the Spanish authorities are now drawing a line under investigations. Kirsty's family have criticised the investigation as apathetic, inept and inefficient with some serious errors. Now, I don't expect the First Minister to comment on a legal case, but I do expect both the UK and the Scottish Government, within their powers, to do more to support families affected by a death abroad. So once again, I would like to appeal to the First Minister, when can we offer families like Kirsty's something more than our condolences?
First Minister.
Well, my thoughts remain with Kirsty Maxwell's family. I have previously met with her family and I know the anguish that they continue to suffer to this day. The Justice Secretary and I have previously stated that we do want to explore this issue further and we are committed to identifying where support can be improved. There are a whole range of issues which families face when they deal with the death of a loved one abroad in suspicious circumstances. These are also issues on some occasions that are faced by victims in Scotland. Through the Victims Task Force, we're considering how these issues can be better tackled, and that consideration is informed by the experiences of victims themselves. We are also awaiting the report of the All-Party UK Parliamentary Group on deaths abroad and consular services to inform how we can make progress on this issue. So we continue to welcome input from Angela Constance, from other members and other stakeholders on how best we can take this forward.
Bob Doris.
Presiding officer, posters have been appearing in communities I serve with the words "Street Valium is killing our community. It has to stop." Unfortunately, the posters convey a tragic truth for far too many. I acknowledge that identifying and prosecuting those who mass produce these illicit benzodiazepines is crucial. However, can I ask the First Minister if the Drugs Death Task Force will consider, as a matter of urgency, how a credible public health and information campaign can be implemented on the ground as soon as possible and in direct partnership with those of lived experience on the very real dangers of street Valium that is claiming the lives of hundreds of people in our communities?
First Minister.
Well, can I thank Bob Doris for raising what is a very important issue. We know that so-called street Valium has a devastating effect in communities across Scotland. I think I've said before in the chamber, I've seen in my own constituency the effect that it has. The Public Health Minister will be happy to ask the Drugs Death Task Force to give their advice on the best ways to take forward a public health message to make the dangers clear. And I know that the Task Force will look to bring forward solutions that work, no matter how challenging some of these solutions might appear to be at first. And of course, the task force includes members who have lived experience of drug use, and their views and insight will be crucial to this work.
Question number 3, Alison Johnson.
Thank you. First Minister, we've every confidence in the SNP government's world-leading ability to set targets. But when it comes to meeting them, well, that's another matter. Class sizes, missed. NHS treatment time guarantee, missed. Urgent cancelled referral targets, missed. Ending fuel poverty, missed. EU air quality targets, missed. UN wildlife protection targets, missed. On landfill, this government conceded it will miss its 2021 target this week. First Minister, Scotland is currently set to miss the government's targets on early years expansion. So why are the targets this Parliament set yesterday on the climate emergency any different?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, in point of fact, what Alison Johnson has just said about early years education is not the case, but that is another matter. On climate change, I'm really proud of what this Parliament did yesterday, and I really struggle to understand the Green position on that. This Parliament yesterday set the strongest, most ambitious, most stringent climate change targets of any country in the world. And I think all of us collectively should be proud of that. And the Green Party in this Parliament sat on their hands while the rest of the Parliament did that. Of course, they'll be challenging to meet those targets. They will require action not just from this government, but from businesses, organisations, individuals, the length and breadth of the country. But we know that Scotland is already ahead of most of the rest of the world in reducing emissions. We've already almost halved our emissions, and that should give all of us confidence that we can meet these targets and that we can not only do the right thing here in Scotland, but continue to lead the world and lead by example. And I, for one, am proud that this country and this government is doing exactly that.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you. Of course, the Greens engaged constructively in the process of setting targets, as we always do, but we cannot back a lack of ambition. The First Minister has often talked about listening to the young people who strike for climate and of her ambitions for tackling the climate emergency. But targets aren't enough. Indeed, Scotland missed its latest greenhouse gas target, and emissions from transport, well, they actually went up. This government continues to commit billions to major road expansion, such as dualling the A96. Will the First Minister take inspiration from the Welsh Government, who cancelled plans for a new motorway after declaring a climate emergency? And will she invest these funds into public transport instead?
First Minister.
Well, I've already said we've started doing this, the early evidence of that was set out in the programme for government, that we will look across all areas of government responsibility and government spend, and we'll look for good ideas and inspiration from anywhere that we can find it. But most of the countries I go to and talk about climate change, including Germany last week, are looking to Scotland because they see Scotland as the world leader, not just in the targets we're setting, but in the action we're taking to meet those targets. The job now is for us to get on and put in place the radical policies that will meet those targets, and that is work that is underway by this government. But I come back to the point, I do genuinely struggle to understand the Green position. I think I would understand it had they sought to amend the 2045 target yesterday, but they didn't. They didn't seek to amend the 2040 target. They didn't seek to amend the 2020 target. Their only disagreement appeared to be around the 2030 target, even although we had increased that from 70 to 75%, taking it beyond what is required to limit temperature warming to 1.5 degrees. So I genuinely struggle to understand how a Green party in a parliament that is taking world-leading action can decide to sit on their hands. And I think people across the country will be utterly perplexed at that.
Further supplementary questions. The first from Christine Graham, to be followed by Liam Kerr. Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I should first declare an interest as convener of the cross-party group on animal welfare. And can I say we welcome the announcement this week establishing a commission on animal welfare and the appointment of Professor Dwyer as chair. But can I ask the First Minister if she's able to tell us when it will be up and running?
First Minister.
I will ask the Minister to write to Christine Graham with the precise details of exactly when that will be up and running. I'm glad she welcomes it as an important step forward. We take all issues of animal welfare very seriously, and I think this announcement this week will ensure that we continue to take the required action, but I'll make sure she gets the further details she's looking for as quickly as possible.
Liam Kerr, to be followed by Gil Patterson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, violent crime has been rising for 4 years in a row and is at the highest level since 2012. So, First Minister, at what point does an anomaly become a trend?
First Minister.
Well, we're never complacent about crime levels. There was a 1% increase in overall crime that we saw in the recent stats. But if we look at the situation overall, this is still one of the lowest levels of crime that we've seen in this country since 1974. And over the period that this government has been in office, crime overall is down by 41%. And non-sexual violent crime is down by 43% since 2006-07. So clearly there will be fluctuations year on year, but the overall trend is downward in terms of crime and violent crime. Part of the reason for that, not the whole reason for that, is unlike the Conservative government south of the border, we haven't slashed police numbers in the way that they've been slashed by 20,000 south of the border. We continue to support our police doing the excellent job they do to keep our communities safe from crime.
Gil Patterson, to be followed by Mark Ruskell. Gil Patterson.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, a constituent of mine, young lady from Clydebank, was on the phone rather distraught. She's an employee, or was an employee of Thomas Cook. No wages to take home, no job. And of course, in Germany, a different decision was taken. The employees there are safe. And I know this is a reserved matter, but I wonder if there's anything that this government can do to alleviate the position of hundreds of people that are employed at Glasgow Airport and other parts of Scotland who have been doing really good work, and exceptionally good work for the work that we're doing at Thomas Cook. And I wonder if we could do something to assist them at this time.
First Minister.
Can I thank Gil Patterson for raising this issue generally, and also, of course, raising the particular issue of his constituency case. We will do everything we can to help employees who are affected by the collapse of Thomas Cook. Of course, this is a reserved matter, although Michael Matheson did take part in the cross-government ministerial meeting on Sunday evening. Obviously, this is devastating for the many people who worked for Thomas Cook, for their families as well. We will continue to work closely with the UK Government and the Civil Aviation Authority as the situation progresses. In terms of workers in particular, I know that Unite the Union is planning to hold a drop-in session for Thomas Cook former employees on Monday from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock in their offices in Glasgow. They will be offering help to workers in their role as trade unions. From the government's perspective, PACE support has been offered to affected employers. We've also been in contact with the Insolvency Service and the special managers who've been appointed in order to reach affected employees. And we've contacted trade unions to offer PACE support for their members. So we will continue to provide whatever help we can to all those affected, and I'm sure the thoughts of everybody across Parliament are with everybody affected, whether the travelling public or the workers of Thomas Cook at this very, very sad time.
Mark Roskell, to be followed by Alex Rowley.
Thank you. Figures released this week show an increase in cyclist deaths and injuries on our streets. Given that speed kills, what new world-leading action will this government take to reduce motor vehicle speed and actually deliver safer streets?
First Minister.
Well, we will continue to look carefully at ways in which we can improve safety on our roads. I know I represent an urban constituency. There have been tragic deaths in my constituency of cyclists in recent times, so I understand how important this is. We are investing significantly in cycle routes in my constituency and in many other parts of Scotland, which are of course crucial to helping improve the safety of those who cycle. We will always consider any further measures as we invest to make cycling safer and invest to make our roads as safe as possible, and we'll continue to listen to any proposals that are brought forward if they are practical and deliverable.
Alex Rowley, to be followed by Maureen Watt.
Presiding Officer, the Managing Director of ScotRail came to the Parliament last week, and in discussion with him, he confirmed that he could not actually give a date for when additional carriages would go into Fife to improve the Fife Circle. What he was absolutely sure about was that there would be a 2.8% increase in rail fares introduced in January by the Scottish Government. Given the poor quality services that the people of Fife are having to put up with, can your government justify an increase of 2.8% in fares?
First Minister.
Well, rail fares and rail fare increases have been lower in Scotland than they have been in other parts of the UK, and I think that is important. But it is also important that ScotRail continues to make the improvements to their services, both in terms of punctuality, reducing cancellations, making sure that there is adequate capacity for the travelling public, and we hold ScotRail to account for that, and we will continue to do so.
Maureen Watt.
The First Minister will have seen a new report from the David Hume Institute, which recommends that the Scottish Government should be given greater powers over immigration, irrespective of the outcome of Brexit. Does the First Minister agree that the UK Government should heed the advice of this report and urgently devolve powers over immigration to this Parliament so that we can tailor an immigration system which meets Scotland's needs and aspirations?
First Minister.
Yes, I agree with that, and I welcome the report from the David Hume Institute. I actually hope this is one issue, maybe one of the only issues, where we can have unanimous support across this chamber. I think many in this chamber, I hope everybody in this chamber, understands that one size does not fit all when it comes to immigration, that Scotland has particular demographic challenges and demographic needs which make it essential that we have the ability to tailor an immigration policy that suits our needs. So I would hope that we can see all parties come behind that call, and I would hope that the UK Government will listen to that and devolve immigration powers to this Parliament as quickly as possible. Of course, when Scotland becomes an independent country, immigration, as with all other powers, will lie in the hands of this Parliament, where I think they will be far better used than they are in the hands of a Tory government at Westminster.
Jamie Green.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. The First Minister might be aware of comments made today by the Equality and Human Rights Commission Scotland, who stated that, and I quote, "Transport operators must ensure equal access to public transport for all. Older people and disabled people must be able to access and use public transport just like everybody else." Would the First Minister agree with me that whilst this might seem like an obvious statement to make, the reality is that for some, adherence to this principle is not universal, I most assure the Chamber that the Government is doing everything in its power to ensure that equity of access to public transport is available to everyone in Scotland.
First Minister.
I agree with that. My apologies, I've not seen the comments from the Equality and Human Rights Commission that the member refers to, or the context in which they are made, but I will make a point of looking at them later on. I think everybody would agree with that statement. I also think we would all readily acknowledge, while that is the case for most of the travelling public, it is not the case for everybody, and we still have work to do to make sure that we have a truly accessible public transport system, and this government is absolutely committed to making sure we take the actions to deliver that.
Question number 4, Emma Harper.
To ask the First Minister, in light of recent deaths and respiratory illnesses attributed to vaping that has been reported in the US by the Centre for Disease Control, what is the Scottish Government's position on the sale and use of vaping and e-cigarette products?
First Minister.
We're monitoring developments in the US and elsewhere closely, following the loss of life that has been attributed to vaping. To date, though, we've not seen any cases of deaths attributed to vaping being reported in Europe. Our approach has been a precautionary one, which is why in Scotland we have already taken the strictest regulatory approach in Europe to vapour products. The European Tobacco Products Directive restricts the advertising of e-cigarettes and ensures that e-liquids can't contain ingredients which are known to be harmful. The directive also limits the concentration of nicotine in e-liquids. In Scotland, we've also introduced a retail register, a mandatory age verification scheme, and we have funded trading standards departments in all council areas to ensure that retailers comply with the regulations. And in the coming months, we will consult on introducing a complete ban on the advertising and promotion of vapour products.
Emma Harper.
Thank the First Minister for that answer. As this Parliament has just highlighted Idiopathic Pulmonary Fibrosis, IPF Week, can I ask whether the First Minister agrees that any action moving forward regarding vaping and e-cigarette products needs to be carried out by listening to experts, following robust evidence-based research and always focusing on what is in the best interest of the public health of the people of Scotland?
First Minister.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. I think it's important to stress, and for all of us to remember, that these are relatively new devices and therefore their impact continues to be studied. We don't fully yet understand what that impact is. And that's why the approach that we have taken has been very cautious. That perhaps is one reason why e-cigarette use remains relatively low in Scotland. But we remain committed to following the best evidence to take any steps necessary to ensure that people are protected from potential harm. And while we already have the strictest, among the strictest regimes on these products, if the evidence shows that further action is needed, I can assure the member that we won't hesitate to take it.
Question number 5, Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government is helping councils to prepare for Brexit.
First Minister.
The Scottish Government has met COSLA's request to allocate £50,000 to each council to coordinate EU exit preparedness. That's a total of £1.6 million. Local authorities are able to submit further funding requests for EU exit costs through the submission of a business case. That process has been put in place for all public sector bodies, and local government are not being treated differently in that respect. We will continue to work closely with local government and COSLA to prioritise and target interventions so that as far as possible we can mitigate the effects on our communities of leaving the EU.
Graham Simpson.
Thank you. The Scottish Government so far received £93 million in Barnett consequentials for Brexit preparations. About £8 million of that should have gone to councils. They've only received, as the First Minister said, £1.6 million so far, and are being told by Derek Mackay to submit business cases for the rest of the cash. In England, councils have been given £83 million to date without having to prove anything. So, with just 35 days to go until Brexit, isn't it time... that councils in Scotland were just given the money they need instead of being made to jump through bureaucratic hoops?
First Minister.
No wonder Jackson Carlos staring at his phone right now.
Absolutely.
We shouldn't be having to spend a single penny on Brexit preparations. Because, let me remind the member, Scotland did not vote for Brexit. The member talks about £98.7 million of consequentials that we've received. So far, we've committed £92 million of that. But the cost of Brexit will far exceed any consequentials that we have received or no doubt will be likely to receive from the UK government. For example, we are having to cover up to £17 million for Police Scotland this year as an unavoidable cost of no-deal Brexit. So it is shameful that a Conservative member of this Parliament gets up here and asks about the money that we're spending to prepare for the impact of policy that his party is imposing on this country against our will. Shame on you.
Sarah Boyack.
First Minister, given the uncertainty caused by Brexit that you've just acknowledged and the evidence we received at Local Government and Communities Committee from COSLA yesterday, can you confirm that the Government will honour your budget agreement and commit to a 3-year budget settlement for local government?
First Minister.
We'll continue to work with COSLA to give them as much certainty as we can around budgets in the years ahead. Obviously, we would be more able to do that if we knew what our own budget looked like, if all of the decisions coming from Westminster had been taken. We don't even know yet when there's going to be a Westminster budget this year. So I do think Sarah Boyack raises an important question, but she surely has to reflect on the fact that the uncertainty that is swirling around the UK government and the entirety of the UK right now has implications for the decision-making process here. But we will continue to work with councils and with other public bodies and with businesses to provide as much certainty as we possibly can. But I think the certainty that most people in Scotland want is to see Brexit not happen at all.
Question number 6, David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to a new study which suggests that young people in the poorest parts of the country are 3 times more likely to die before their 25th birthday than those in the most affluent areas.
First Minister.
Well, findings like that are shocking. They are a major cause for concern, but perhaps most importantly of all, they underline the importance of the concrete actions that this government is taking to tackle deep-seated poverty and inequality, including health inequalities. So, for example, our alcohol and drug strategy is backed by new investment and sets out actions we're taking to reduce alcohol and drug use. We're also investing over £3 million more to 2021 to support suicide prevention. Our Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan outlines the actions we're taking to eradicate child poverty, including, of course, the new Scottish Child Payment for all eligible families by the end of 2022, with early introduction for families with children under 6 by Christmas next year. In 2018-19, we spent over £1.4 billion in direct support to low-income households. £100 million of that was to mitigate the worst impact of Tory government welfare cuts. It is those actions that are continuing to push people into poverty, and it's those actions that we must unite to fight against.
David Stewart.
Presiding Officer, Aberlour Trust, who sponsored the research, argue that a bad start shouldn't mean a bad end. And Professor Traynor, who carried out the research, emphasised the impact of poverty across the whole of a child's life, with links to housing, health inequalities and education, all areas where the Scottish Government has the power to take radical action. Does the First Minister share my view that a young person's life expectancy should not be dependent on a postcode lottery, and the solution is a major shift in policy to fight with vigour and fortitude the massive inequality between the rich and poor in society?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree, but I would point to the radical actions that this government is taking, doubling provision of early years education and childcare, the GIRFEC approach to make sure we are protecting children in their earliest years, our commitment to record numbers of new affordable housing, outstripping anything we're seeing anywhere else in the UK, and thirdly, of course, the new Scottish Child Payment, which is, in the words of anti-poverty campaigners, game-changing in the fight against child poverty. I've said this before to Richard Leonard, and I'll say it again here. We rightly heard a lot from Labour before we took the decision about the Scottish Child Payment, demanding that we introduced it, talking about how transformational it would be. Since we've announced the decision to introduce it, I don't think I've heard a single member of the Labour benches talk about it. This is the kind of radical action that we are taking doing that, interestingly, their Labour colleagues in Wales are not taking. So we will continue to take the action to fight poverty, not just talk about it.
Alison Allen.
I wonder if the First Minister has any analysis as to how Tory welfare cuts are impacting on the poorest in our society, from the benefit freeze, the two-child cap and changes to the work allowance, and how much is being cut a year in social security spend in Scotland by this UK Government.
First Minister.
Well, the Scottish Government's 2019 Welfare Reform Report set out some of that analysis. It estimated that UK Government cuts could reduce annual social security spending in Scotland by £500 million a year. Those cuts have already pushed thousands of families in Scotland into poverty, with post-2015 UK Government welfare changes set to reduce spending on social security by that estimated £500 million a year. 8,500 Scottish families have had their income cut by the two-child limit. That figure will reach 40,000 at full rollout, and that will bring 20,000 children into poverty. The benefit cap is affecting more than 3,000 households. 91% of these households contain children. They're losing an average of £3,000 a year. That's what we're having to spend over £100 million a year right now mitigating. Of course, that requirement to mitigate was described by the UN Special Rapporteur as outrageous. So that is the price we currently pay to allow welfare powers to lie in the hands of a Tory government at Westminster. And I would call on Labour, the Liberals, I know the Greens are already on board, I would even call on some of the Tories to think about this deeply and call in a united fashion for all welfare powers to come to this Parliament so that we can start to treat people with dignity and respect.
Thank you. And that concludes First Minister's questions. We're going to turn shortly to a members' business debate in the name of Rachel Hamilton on congratulating Doddy Weir OBE and calling for automatic access to Blue Badge scheme for people with MND. But we're just going to have a short suspension to allow members and members of the public to re-enter the gallery. So a short suspension.